Welcome from the deep, I am Mike the Finder, and welcome to another episode of Graveyard Shift, a series where Brett and I do solo reviews, and today we're talking about the 2022 film The Adam Project, starring Mark Ruffalo, Ryan Reynolds, Jennifer Gardner, and this is directed by Sean Levy. Ryan Reynolds and Sean Levy, I think the producers as well, are the team that made Free Guy. I personally have not seen Free Guy, but I have heard very good things from people that I trust. Sean Levy is the same director that is slated to do Deadpool 3, and I think that actually makes a lot of sense. This movie is basically about time travel being real. We find ourselves in 2050. Ryan Reynolds is a fighter pilot. And in this universe, they've kind of wrapped fighter pilots and time travel into the same thing, so you have this ability to create wormholes to go back in time. Ryan Reynolds steals the jet right at the beginning of the movie. He goes back to 2022, and he crash lands, and he ends up meeting his 12-year-old self. Right off the bat, I started noticing Terminator references, Back to the Future references, and just a handful of other things that are not only referenced in this, it does sort of just assume that you know all of these rules from other time travel movies like Back to the Future. But because Back to the Future is one of my favorite things, it was kind of impossible for me to not notice all of the direct parallels. They're not trying to hide it at all, but it does sort of play by the more widely accepted pop culture rules of time travel. And it does it in a really meaningful way. I was not sure what to expect. I went into it thinking I kind of wasn't gonna like this because most of the Ryan Reynolds stuff that I have seen lately, I feel like he's kind of gone down the path of a Seth Rogen or Danny McBride or somebody like that, where they just sort of play the same character over and over again. And this goes all the way back to like Van Wilder. Now that's not necessarily a bad thing, and especially in this movie, I think it works really well. But if you look beyond Ryan Reynolds' sort of snarky outside, there's a very endearing movie about family in this. That's something that I really wasn't expecting. The only knowledge I went into this with was watching the trailer, so I was kind of expecting a really shallow sci-fi movie. But what I got instead was a movie that actually left me feeling way more than I thought I would, in what I assumed was just going to be another shallow sci-fi, look at how pretty we can make this look type of movie. Maybe my expectations were just set in a different place, and what I got instead was actually kind of surprising. Now, like I said before, they do sort of play with the expectations of time travel in a way that is really interesting and kind of fun to watch. Because of that, you can kind of tell that the people that wrote this were sort of big fanboys. Moving into the future, we're going to have more and more of that because over the last 10 years or so, people my age and even the generation above are the people that are starting to make the creative decisions in these movies. And because of that, there's a lot of fanboying in a lot of movies now. Everything is self-aware, everything is comic booky, and I tend to really not like that stuff at all. I thought it was kind of interesting to be really self-aware and meta at first. I don't feel like that's really that interesting anymore. If you want to hear more of my thoughts about that, check out our Scream 2022 review. And because I don't like that kind of stuff, I feel like movies like this, I go in with expectations of being kind of pandered to. The Adam Project doesn't really do that. It tells this really sweet story about a guy who has lost his wife, who steals a jet and breaks every single time travel rule there is to try to find his wife. We will be getting into spoilers in this review, so fair warning there. But once he finds his wife basically says, I need you to go back and stop time travel from ever existing. And with that idea, I actually ended up loving the premise of this movie. The idea that this guy goes back and makes contact with his not only 12-year-old self, but he's able to see his father who had passed away. There's a really universally loved idea here that you can go back and sort of fix things that you think about a lot. And I think that's why this works so well. Now, when he goes back and makes contact with his 12-year-old self, not only is that really against time travel rules, the fact that this entire movie takes place with a 44-year-old version and a 12-year-old version, they are constantly going back and forth and learning from each other. There's this really sweet interaction whenever they're at the Pine Motel, which is this really beautifully framed shot with the neon hotel sign above them. They're at a picnic bench. The kid basically says, listen, I know that you hate your father, but I think it's because you've made yourself hate your father because it's easier than missing him. Not only does the 12-year-old point out this flaw in his logic that he's been walking around angry at his dad, but he also teaches the kid that he's not always going to be this asthmatic, smaller, young kid that everybody picks on. This is an idea that I think everybody in the world can relate to, despite it being sort of fanboy, and it is very self-aware. Not only do they play with your expectations because of those other movies, but they play with them in a way that is fun and actually interesting and not just, ha ha ha, remember Back to to the Future. When he meets his younger self, that's what's known as parallel contact. And parallel contact is highly, highly frowned upon because it means you're literally changing what happens in the past to affect the future. Is it Sorian, who is basically a giant supervillain. She lives in this house that has a big S on the top of it, and all of the doors have S's on them. It's so over the top and goofy that I couldn't help but laugh at it, but that's also kind of the point of it. This is a very comic book-esque movie without being a comic book-esque movie. But it sort of plays by the comic book rules, where everything is very high action and over the top. And because of that, they can get away with a lot more stuff, like their antagonist living in a giant mansion that has an S on the top of it, who has built this giant tech Goliath that has enough money to not only fund the person inventing time travel, but then create the tech to make time travel possible. Because it's so over the top, it's almost like the action almost gets in the way, because it wants to be this big action-y movie, but it's also trying really hard to be this really sweet, compelling, character-driven movie. I think it kind of walks the line pretty well up until the ending. Now let's talk about the ending for a second. Like I said, we are going to be talking about spoilers, but the ending is basically they contact their dad. The dad basically says, "Do not tell me about my future."
I need to tell you something.
No.
It's about the future, isn't it?
You can't say anything else to me. I can't know the future.
I warned you about this, kid.
You cannot tell me how or when it happens. You came back here because no one has a right to change the future, including us.
I refuse to accept the responsibility.
But they contact their dad, they destroy the original time machine, so no one will ever be able to recreate the technology that they use to create time travel. It's basically like time travel never existed, and so everything gets sort of wrapped up in a nice, neat little box. The supervillain goes to shoot a gun at them to kill them at the very end. The bullet gets pulled in by the electromagnetic field. She ends up killing her younger self, therefore creating this brand new timeline where not only did time travel not happen, all of the stuff that we see in this movie never happened either. And I think that might be kind of where it loses me. Of course, they do kind of make fun of the people that are going to say things exactly like what I'm about to say, like, you're thinking too much about it, and we watch too many movies. There's this scene from Back to the Future where Marty says, "I got all the time in the world. I have a time machine." And I can't help but think why the supervillain just never went back in time and stopped him from taking the time machine in the first place, therefore stopping this entire set of events from unfolding. Instead, she goes 30 or 40 years before to try to stop him from doing the thing. Whereas she could have gone 5 minutes before he took the jet, none of this would have ever happened, and she'd still be running the entire world because of time travel. Like Biff from Back to the Future.
Idiot.
You have a time machine and you have all the time in the world. Now, Ryan Reynolds doesn't. They even make a point to say you only have one more jump left. You'll never get back if you make this next jump. And therefore, it sort of explains away why he can't continuously use the time machine to solve all of his problems. The supervillain doesn't have any of those constraints, and she can just kind of go and do whatever she wants. Therefore, creating this giant plot hole of you have a time machine and you have all of the time in the world. Now, she plays into this movie because she is the person that is investing all of the money into the father's research, possibly using wormholes to create time travel portals that you can go back in time through. Mark Ruffalo is in here only because not only do they need somebody to be the godfather of time travel, but they also need somebody to sort of plot dump a whole bunch of stuff that if you're not up to speed at this point in the movie, we gotta fill you in on what's happening because the rest of this movie isn't gonna make sense if you haven't been paying attention. So they do it under the guise of him kind of asking questions to the kids and stuff, but those are kind of my only gripes about it. Despite the plot holes and despite some of the stuff that I don't care for and it being a little bit too referential to other movies and stuff like that, there's a really sweet movie in here about family and it's really endearing. And this movie is kind of not only about accepting who your parents are as just people, but also accepting who you are and maybe looking at your family through a different lens than you have before. Kind of understanding that they're just people and they make their own mistakes. And I kind of feel like Adam's character development works in a really sweet way where he goes from kind of hating his father because he's built him up in his head for so long of like this person that he must hate instead of dealing with the fact that he never really grieved for his father. His dad ends up actually being a really sweet guy and there's this this really, really sweet moment at the end where Mark Ruffalo looks Ryan Reynolds in the face and says, no, I love you. I am sorry I am not going to be there for the rest of your life. And it's this really, really sweet moment. And then they wrap everything up in this tight little box where they've concluded all of their time travel stories and all this, and everything works out for the best. I think the ending is a little bit heavy-handed, but those are kind of my only complaints about this movie. It is a beautiful movie. The color grade is perfect, and it's shot really well. There is such good framing in this movie, and especially for how much CGI there is, it's beautiful. Now, the CGI with Catherine Keener, she's great in this movie, but the CGI of her younger self is so god-awful that when it's on screen, it is so noticeable. But other than that, the CGI all looks really good. The action scenes, while over the top, are really fun to watch. Some of them drag out a little bit too long. I kind of feel like it gets lost in its own action scenes at some points. But overall, I really, really enjoyed this a lot more than I thought I did, despite how much Netflix's quality is terrible. I want to show a couple screenshots here while I talk about this. These are screenshots of the very climax of this movie. I only have the 1080 Netflix plan, and you can say, oh, it's because your internet is terrible that it looks like this. No other streaming website looks like this when I watch 1080 movies. None of them. Yes, I have all of my settings set to show the absolute best all the time. This is what I'm watching when I'm paying Netflix. What is it, $15 a month now? They put millions of dollars in this movie to make it look beautiful. They hire great actors. They hire cinematographers that can shoot the crap out of this. They hire gaffers that really make the lighting really beautiful. All of these people put so much effort into this movie, and this is what it looks like when I'm watching it. This is why I have a giant collection of movies behind me. This is what it looks like when you're watching a new 2022 movie streaming on Netflix. But that was not enough to make me hate this movie. I loved this movie so much more than I thought I would. There is an actual great story in here. The script is phenomenal. The cinematography is great. The acting is awesome. The kid that plays young Adam in this is fantastic. Sometimes I'm really pulled out by child actors, generally bad acting, but not once did that happen in this movie with Walker Scobell, the kid that played young Adam. I'm gonna go ahead and rate this a 7 out of 10. I loved this movie. It's far from a masterpiece, and it's a little bit too referential and relies too much a little bit on the rules and knowledge from other movies to make it really stand on its own, I think. Overall, this is a really great movie. So what did you think about this movie? Did you like it? Did you hate it? I kind of feel like this is a love-hate movie. So let me know what you thought about this down in the comments below. Thank you guys for watching, and I will see you guys next time from the deep. Mike the Finder out. See ya.